enjoy the talk of Elena of HFS Research on digital transformation and the myth of RPA.
Hello, digital procurement world. I'm delighted to be here with you today, and we're going to talk a little bit about digital transformation and the myth of RPA. First, a little bit about me. So as I mentioned, my name is Elena. I'm a Senior Vice President with HFS Research. I have an incredibly fun job where I get to look at the impact of emerging technologies on business operations. I've been here for about 4 years, and we do a ton of research looking in this space. I also spend time looking through the industry lens, and I specialize in banking and financial services. But I do also like to point out that this is not just a one-time cool research study I've done to come and talk with you about today. I've been in the marketplace for about 25 years at this point, either as a researcher, as an advisor, or as a provider delivering solutions to clients. So I look forward to bringing some of that expertise to bear in our conversation today. So with that, let's dive in and get to the detail of what the heck we're going to be talking about today. So the agenda I've prepared for you is we'll do a bit of what, why, and how. So the what is, let's talk about what the pandemic changed forever, and I'll share some of our latest and greatest research from HFS with you to support that. Secondly, we'll talk a little bit about RPA, so robotic process automation, why it's a helpful widget, but do not mistake this as a digital transformation panacea. No, no, no. More about that shortly. And then last but not least, the how is, how can you cultivate procurement as an ecosystem builder for the enterprise? So we'll talk a bit about sort of the strategic vision for where we go from here. So let's dive into the research then. So as a research house, and particularly during the pandemic, where what everybody wanted to do was to be able to tell the future, we did a whole bunch of different research studies. But this is our latest and greatest one. We surveyed 800 enterprises around the globe, a very intentional mix of IT and business leaders, because we always like to have that balance. And one of the key things that we were really looking to understand is what were some of the most enduring impacts of the global pandemic. And so this slide starts to get to that, to speak to some of that, which is we believe that one of the most enduring impacts of the pandemic, sort of a product of all of this forced digital change that was pushed upon us, is truly changing how and where work gets done forever. What this particular slide is showing, we asked our respondents for this study to comment on their expected level of work from home. We couched it as work from home because I don't know about you, but here I stand in my office, month sort of 18 of that type of arrangement. Many of us have been working from home, but we do believe the broader imperative is that this becomes work from anywhere. In any case, the study question was, what's the expected level of work from home for your organization over the next 12 months or so? This study is just done, so it's very much looking forward through 2021 and onward. So I can tell you that across all of these sectors that are shown on the slide, the average percent of continued work from home on a go-forward basis is 40%. So we refer to this as the Goldilocks ratio. So the mix between work from home, or perhaps work from anywhere, and in office on a go-forward basis is 40-60. This is an incredible change to exactly how work and how business operations are done that's got gigantic implications on an onward basis, and really sets the course for what every enterprise needs to do to be able to best address what their employee needs are, their customer needs, as well as what their partner needs are. So let's talk a little bit about how this change is going to come for global enterprises. So in the same study that I mentioned, again with those 800 enterprises, one of the other key questions we ask is what are the major changes that you're going to be undertaking to help embrace the forced change and the work from anywhere economy, as we tend to call it. And so something interesting happened. We gave a whole variety of answers. So the three options that rose to the top in terms of what's the change that's really going to be driven by enterprises as they embrace the work from anywhere economy, first and foremost, increasing the digital fluency of the workforce. Now, that sounds perhaps a bit like a fluffy term, but if you think about it, digital fluency, it's all about how us as employees and workers, how we're able to both use digital technologies, even conceptualize better ways of getting work done, as well as how we collaborate with our peers and ultimately how we work effectively, how we optimize business operations and what our jobs are, regardless of where we're physically located. So this imperative to increase the digital fluency of the workforce I think is honestly wonderful that this has risen to the top as one of the top change imperatives of enterprises. Number two that showed up here is all around cloud migration and modernization. Cloud has become one of those buzzword terms, honestly, a little bit like digital transformation, where you say, well, cloud, so what does that really mean? And I say it tends to mean sort of one of three things. You've got cloud as an infrastructure connotation, cloud as an applications migration connotation, and then cloud as a data connotation, data migration as well as data management connotation. The reality is it's truly all of those things. So you should think, I encourage any enterprise to have a sort of comprehensive view of what cloud potentially means to them and the different facets by which they need to be looking at it. But for this particular study, it was the number two most important change that enterprises are planning, which is cloud migration and modernization. But from the same study, something that we learned about what enterprises are actually migrating to the cloud, data, the availability of information, which is tied very closely to improving that digital fluency of the workforce and enabling the work from anywhere economy. So cloud is coming up as a very, very critical change agent. And last but not least is this concept of optimizing end-to-end processes. We can't just go through this whole 18 months of forced digital change put upon us by the pandemic and not change how we do things. Just fundamentally being physically in a different location is a huge amount of change. And so we've all adopted over time. But part of what we need to do now is make sure that we're optimizing processes for, as I showed on the prior side, as we increasingly get to that new Goldilocks ratio of the 40 to 60, 40% work from anywhere to 60% perhaps office-based, making sure that we optimize that and truly get those end-to-end processes together. So these are some of the big impacts of the pandemic, how enterprises are responding, and I'd like to share with you HFS's view of what this looks like on a go-forward basis, sort of the roadmap, if you will, for post-pandemic business operations success. What I have up on screen here is what we call our one office model. The simple concept of the one office, first and foremost, we think that it's essentially showcases digital transformation in action. It's our stake in the ground of, as you as an enterprise embrace a variety of emerging technologies, people and process change, improved data approaches, great use of cloud, what it should start to do for your enterprise is help you break down your internal silos. The most identifiable internal silos are front, middle, and back office, as well as a whole variety of different business operations functions that do exist as little islands. Our findings, and we're seeing increased examples of this as we go through the pandemic and start to see potential line of sight towards pandemic end, that what all of this digital transformation, this use of emerging tech and so forth enables is for enterprises to break down those internal silos, to get rid of front, middle, and back office and get to the only office that we believe really matters, which is the one office. So thus, that's the inspiration for the name. I'll point out, if you look at the big orange circle in the center, the three key pillars of how you actually get to or enable the one office are native automation. This is truly leveraging automation technologies, not just RPA, hold that thought, but a broad array of automation technologies to enable your transformation and to truly improve work to create those end-to-end process optimizations I mentioned on the prior slide. As well as the second pillar, people and process change. As I mentioned before, there ain't no transformation without change. Thinking that you can't update, change, improve, reinvent your processes for this new work from anywhere economy is nuts. Of course, there's going to be change. So we need to plan for it and dive headlong into it. And last but not least, and all importantly, is data and decisions. So many of the challenges that exist in enterprises today, certainly across the source-to-pay value chain, the bane of any CPO's existence is not having the right data, or all sorts of challenges tied to how do I get data from here to here to answer the questions that I need. That's simply to look backwards. It's a whole different ball of wax to truly drive decisions and to drive predictive analytics and such. But investing in each of these three pillars helps to, firstly, improve employee experience. That's sort of the wing on the left side of the slide, as well as improve customer experience, how your customers interact with you, how they're able to transact, how they're able to drive self-service. We do know that great employee experience always begets great customer experience. And then I think the third element that gets pulled through with this, that's not necessarily represented here, is partner experience, the PX, because they're a key part of your global ecosystems, and many of these same investments and this digital transformation journey to the one office also impact your partners as well. I want to switch over and talk to you a little bit about some very specific sourcing and procurement context. And obviously, part of the headline for this session is the so-called myth of RPA. But I want to talk about some of the change agents that are helping enterprises actually achieve the one office. And so this data is from, we did 28 drill down interviews with different chief procurement officers, as well as other leaders within sourcing and procurement practices within Global 2000 enterprises. And we asked a whole variety of questions. This particular sample are those that are actually involved in outsourcing arrangements, working with external partners to help them modernize, manage, and improve their procurement operations. And so in this particular question, we asked them what are the emerging technologies that they're leveraging as part of their procurement outsourcing engagements. And so you'll see there's a legend down at the bottom here, and so it's different stages of use. So it's the orange is not leveraging, the next navy blue is proof of concept, and so on and so forth. I'll just bring up some highlight points here. To me, what's just overwhelmingly interesting about this particular slide and this data that we received is the very limited use, the very limited adoption at scale of so many of these different emerging technologies. And so the bit that I've banded in red there on the side is showing the level of scaled and industrialized for most of these technologies, from machine learning to the IoT, Internet of Things, to NLP, which is natural language processing, computer vision, blockchain, and so on and so forth. Very limited scaled adoption. And it's honestly not for lack of use cases. We've definitely seen a variety of interesting use cases bringing together many of these technologies, from whether it be like PO triage to invoice matching, use of cognitive assistants, sort of smart chatbots, if you will, to drive decisions and answer questions. So the use cases are there. The one that really stands out, though, is at the top of the list here. RPA, the sort of glowing example of success with emerging technology in sourcing and procurement. But if you look a little closer, really, the success is not actually that glowing. What we see, in fact, is just 15% of use of RPA is scaled and industrialized. You got a whole heck of a lot of proof of concept pilots and very limited in production. And again, it's not for lack of potential benefit. I'm going to give you two reasons why there is perhaps not broader adoption of some of these emerging technologies, and we'll start squarely with RPA and broader process automation. The first one I'll mention on this slide, which is we know this from our history of doing tech-enabled anything. No single tool can ever solve the problem. Some of those elements I mentioned back on the One Office slide, people in process change, having the right data and driving decisions, as well as a whole bunch of change management, tend to be what's really necessary to drive change within enterprises. No tool is magically going to do that, so that's part of why we refer to as RPA is not panacea technology. But I'll share this very fancy slide with you because what we've observed, there's a light quantification here, is that so much of what enterprises are investing in and focusing their automation efforts on today, it's actually much more centered on buying time, sort of a Band-Aid approach of sorts, rather than transforming anything. And so we estimate about 80% of automation initiatives today are actually in pursuit of doing things cheaper and faster. So we refer to this as now value. We sort of hopefully helpfully put a nice little rectangle definition here. But so much of now value is around helping legacy technology and processes stay relevant, sometimes with a bit of a digital veneer, until a future tech intervention. And I will say there is absolutely nothing wrong with now value, because now value is, well, now. It's often the CFO's favorite type of value, because it's good to have now value. But you have to be careful that you're not couching it as transformation. Because the flip side of this sort of the insurmountable peaks, if you will, is transformation. So we estimate probably about 20% of automation initiatives today are focused on transformation. And those are the ones, when they're involving automation, it tends not to be a singular tool focus like I mentioned, and it's much more in line with our vision of native automation, that terminology I mentioned 2 slides back as part of our One Office. We define native automation, again, a helpful rectangle box definition for you, but it's a use of a range of technologies to create intelligent and automated workflows, typically in the cloud. You may as well go modern all around, so you don't need more Band-Aids in the future, in support of the One Office. And the big caveat and corollary here is that now value is great. Transformation is also wonderful, particularly for future-facing initiatives and such. But what you have to be careful about is be clear about what you're enabling, because otherwise you fall into this pit in the middle, which we've affectionately termed the bottomless BS chasm. You do not want to fall there, because there is literally no bridge from now value, cheaper and faster, to transformation. That bridge is perpetually up in flames. So if you're going for now value, call it what it is, take those wins and benefits now, but do not call it transformation. Now, I want to transition a little bit to talk about some of our vision for the future of procurement, and where it can sit within an enterprise. Because to us, that distinction between, well, how do we go after now value versus really going after transformative value? Well, typically you really need a reason to transform, because it's one thing to optimize, like back to the when I showed you that data that showed digital fluency, migration to the cloud, and then optimization of end-to-end processes. Going after the end-to-end process optimization is great across your source-to-pay value chain, optimizing, I always think of it as sort of source-to-contract, and then over to procure-to-pay and all the elements that exist with underneath it. There's lots of work to be done, but we do think that there's a bigger picture here. We do think that there's this kind of ecosystem builder concept that is perhaps the future of any procurement organization. Our research has shown, and we fundamentally believe, that there's no function within enterprises today other than sourcing and procurement functions that are literally designed to drive collaboration and build ecosystems with all of the appropriate governance and management built into it. We know that so much of the procurement focus, it's a lot of the cost management and compliance management, but taking those types of characteristics and applying them much more broadly across the enterprise is something that, as we strive for optimization of the work from anywhere economy, as we strive for the One Office, as we want to work better both within our own functional silos, like source to pay, and start putting our hooks into how that impacts HR, how that impacts supply chain, how that impacts finance, how it ultimately will always derivatively impact customer experience. How you can make that as big as possible. It's so many of the skills of procurement. So we have this sort of strategic vision for where we think that the role of procurement needs to go. And so the hope is, and ultimately our recommendation, is to think bigger about what the role of procurement can be and really push it towards much more of this strategic vision, because we think that many of the inherent skills that procurement organizations and their CPO leaders have should not just be limited to managing the vendor community. Let's see what you can do to help your enterprise overall. And I'd like to offer a few thoughts on where do you start. I mentioned in some of my comments throughout the conversation today that so many challenges do tend to start with data. So we put together, with this in mind, we put together what we call the HFS One Office Data Cycle. It's sort of meant to give a starting point for enterprises about how they can think about where they should conceptualize and how to dive in with starting to make change and pushing towards the One Office digital transformation approach. And so we state this. Most enterprises are probably here, and the here in all of this is you have some data problems. As I've mentioned, so many challenges start with data. How do I get the right data? How do I access the right data? How do I bring the right data together? How do I have an accurate view of what's happened? How do I have an accurate view of what's going forward, whether it be across strategic sourcing management, category management, supplier management, and again, all of the elements that are tied into the source to pay value chain. Well, if you start to think about your processes, back to that change imperative of rethinking your processes oriented around how do I make sure I have the data that I actually need? That allows you to then, as we go around this continuum, to start thinking about how to design your processes, your operational flows, and put them in the cloud to ensure that you actually have access to the data that you need. Once you've got your workflows designed, you can start to take, and ideally sitting in the cloud, you can start to look at where automation can fit in. Now, automation, particularly if you've reinvented processes, you've got them sitting in the cloud, you've probably solved a lot of your data challenges, you've probably also eradicated a lot of manual work, but for what is done, that's where we believe that this concept of native automation, making automation a standard element of how work gets done, can start to be inserted. By the way, if your flows or workflows are in the cloud, you may not actually need RPA. So many of the RPA use cases, not all, but the vast majority of RPA use cases are actually for essentially enabling legacy because you don't have access to APIs. If your workflows are in the cloud, you likely, more than likely, have access to APIs. So automation, process automation, and the push for native automation is not necessarily about RPA. Then the continuum goes on, and you get to the point where once you have your workflows in the cloud, reinvented, native automation injected, you can likely start to use that data to do things with cognitive capabilities like machine learning or natural language processing. Because honestly, us as humans, we may have the power of empathy, for feeling, emotion, and all of these wonderful things that are so great about being humans, but we also make mistakes. And so being able to bring in cognitive capabilities into many of our workflows helps to perhaps eradicate or at least substantially lessen some of the mistakes that are made and really come up with insights that perhaps we as humans may have never even conceptualized. And then the cycle comes around again. This is essentially a sort of rinse-repeat continuum, but meant to be a very simple approach to think about where do you start, and starting from an orientation of data almost never hurts. Now, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I'm a big fan of narrative closure. So I'll tell you what I told you. So some of the key takeaways that I have for you today. So when you think about what Elena Christopher had to share with you today about digital transformation and the myth of RPA, I'd say this. Our post-pandemic reality is all about the work from anywhere economy. We know the pandemic created this forced digital change. So where and how work gets done is truly changed forever. So the onus is on us within our organizations to figure out how to best support our employees, our customers, as well as our partners. That's critical to success. Takeaway number 2. Part of how you can do this is through cultivating a one-office mindset. I use that terminology mindset very intentionally because the concept and the willingness to want to break down those internal silos to deliver a better employee experience, to deliver a better customer experience, as well as partner experience, it starts with the willingness to change. So it is very much a mindset, and that's tied to that point we talked about earlier, cultivating digital fluency. Thirdly, do not get sucked into the bottomless BS chasm. The challenge with that is you're going after now value, but you're calling it transformation. Call it what it actually is. And RPA is actually a great tool, but is very much aligned to now value. Do not make the mistake of thinking that you can bring RPA into your shop and it's going to solve all of your problems, because that is definitely a prime example of wallowing in the bottomless BS chasm. Call it what it is. And now value is great, as I mentioned. Just be very particular about what you're going after. Okay, and last but not least, it's really critical to have a clear and strategic vision for the future of procurement. It's as I couched it earlier, it's essentially that reason to transform, because everything else is sort of the now value, or at least 80% of it, as I articulated earlier. As I shared with you, our vision for what is the future of procurement, we really believe you've got the unique skill sets to become that ecosystem builder for the enterprise. So we recommend that you leverage the strategic direction as well as that one-off office data cycle that I walked you through, and use that to help you achieve your digital future in our new post-pandemic work from anywhere reality. And so with that, I'll say a hearty thank you. Have a great rest of the event, and thank you so much for spending some time with me today.
Thank you, Elena, for sharing all your inspirational thoughts with us. I think it was really inspiring. And thank you for joining us here live today. So are you ready for a Q&A?
100%. Thank you, Vivienne.
All right, so let's jump right into it then. So the first question, if people in procurement have to learn one new skill, what do you think that should be?
And we can debate whether this is a skill or not, but I will say it's the art of looking up. And what I mean by that is that we get so enmeshed in what our day-to-day existence is, particularly in this work from anywhere economy these days. And so what I mean by looking up, it's sort of creating and cultivating that mindset of change that I spoke about in my session, which is I understand what my role is, either often in sourcing, category management, contract management, supplier management, vendor management, all these things that work across the source to pay landscape. But it's looking up, figuring out what the real challenges are that impede me, impede my team, impede broader efficiency, broader productivity, and being thoughtful about ways that you can actually change that. And I'm one of the first to say it doesn't have to be a technology solution. That's kind of part of my point about the so-called myth of RPA. Technology enables, it does not save the day. So it's looking up, looking around at your processes, what your roles are, figuring out ways to improve, and also being very thoughtful about where your part of whatever you're responsible for, how it snaps into other things, because again, that difference between sort of now value versus transformative change, it's also about having a broader view of the processes and what you're actually impacting, because very often the root of problems can be very far downstream or very far upstream. Just in my point there, just not sitting right there with you. So you sometimes have to look farther afield. So cultivating that willingness to try and solve problems, and I guess ultimately what I'm prescribing is the willingness, the openness to change and do things better is the thing that every single human on this planet needs. And the good news there, or perhaps silver lining of the pandemic, is that all of this forced change has gotten us all sort of like our change muscle is in pretty good shape these days, I'd say.
Oh, I really love that. Like looking up, but also being open to learn new stuff. And I totally agree that we are changing rapidly due to the pandemic as well. And also what I'm noticing is that a lot of speakers I'm hearing at DPW are actually mentioning this and are referring what people would like to call the 21st century skills. So it's all about mentality, being open, having a growth mindset. So can you relate to that? Is it about the 21st century skills, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Some of that data that I shared in my presentation, the number one change agent, essentially, or way to help drive change that 800 enterprises around the globe indicated as their top priority was cultivating digital fluency. I mentioned in my talk, it kind of sounds like a fluffy term, but it's very much getting at that. It's sort of another way to term it, I suppose, is sort of that 21st century skills. But it's, yes, it's some technology, but as I mentioned just a few moments ago, tech is not going to save the day. Yes, you need to have new skills, but a lot of that openness is maintaining the things that are great about us humans, which is the collaboration, the empathy, looking for ways to solve problems, but also realizing like we don't have to stand for manual processes. If we've got major data problems and we spend all of our time literally like working on the data farm, then we need solutions. And that's part of what these 21st century, the true cultivation of digital fluency needs to be all about. And at its heart, it's continuing to cultivate and celebrate the elements that make us human, because that is what's great about us. We are not robots, but figuring out how the machines in our lives, the software, the technology can help us be better at the things that are innately human about us. That's essential to 21st century skills and digital fluency, in my opinion.
Yeah, thank you. And talking about digital fluency, we have actually a question about it. The question is there a need to have employees across the board, so all functions, including procurement, formally educated in digital?
Oh, absolutely. And you know, it's happening whether you're actively investing in this or not. It's happening. I mean, even with things like, I'll give you, given that RPA was in the title of my session, you've had things like Microsoft, for example, on a go forward basis, they bundle a light version of RPA into, at this point, Windows 10. But the point of that is that it's not like big enterprise back office RPA, it's personal productivity RPA. It's allowing anyone who wants to utilize this part of their platform to have some help with almost sort of like a personal digital assistant. So it starts to happen. And again, to the point I made earlier about cultivating that, the mindset and being open to change, anyone who's starting to think like that is trying to figure out ways to solve problems. So digital fluency is definitely about the tools. I do encourage, and I see this in my research a lot, and the research of my broader house at HFS Research, is there's lots of talk about upskilling employees, generating and cultivating digital fluency, but it's apparently supposed to happen organically. Yes, it's happening sort of naturally, as I mentioned, but enterprises want their employees to be skilled up, have better knowledge, but it's not going to happen magically. This needs to be part of your change initiative to make sure that you're funding programs for your staff to actually embrace some of these new technologies, whether it be RPA, whether it be simple understanding of some of the interesting AI-enabled tools, whether it be natural language processing or machine learning, like the different types of algorithms that start to get baked into ways that we do our work. Because it may not always be someone has to use the tool, but they need to understand where technology is being injected to help drive process change. So part of it is it's a lot of awareness. I find the most neglected piece of change in organizations is actually change management, because the communication of that change is not just a point in time. Oh, well, we did a town hall. Well, that's wonderful. You need perpetual ongoing communication with all of your employees about what you're trying to do. And above all, and this is the most important part, what the objectives are. What are you trying to work for? So you can get everybody on that same bus. And again, looking up and looking in the right direction together.
Wow, yeah. So it's all about also putting your money where your mouth is, right? So if you're full of transformation, maybe you really need to invest in the people making it happen as well.
Yeah. And even as you say that out loud, Vivian, investing in people, everyone on this planet knows that's never a bad idea.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you so much. So we have one last question before we really need to go. And the last question is, where does innovation, a key point of continuous disruption, right, sit in the future role of procurement?
Oh, in lots of ways. It's funny, I showed that slide about some research we had done with procurement leaders. and it showed very low adoption of some of the leading forms of emerging tech today. And the most adopted was actually RPA, and even that was, shall we say, a bit anemic. But it's there. There's lots of interesting use cases across automation, artificial intelligence, smart analytics. I'd say, and I may have mentioned it in my session, that what everyone wants to do during the pandemic, and it's something that's here to stay, is tell the future of real-time analytics. So things like having dashboards, like a CPO dashboard, is something that's really, really on the rise. So the objective is not how much tech can we use, how much innovation can we drive into what we're doing. It's about, sort of like I couched before, let's be thoughtful about what your problems are. What are you actually trying to solve for? To be thoughtful, looking across, firstly, your full source to pay value chain, and then also figuring out where the hooks are into other elements of your enterprise as you start to push towards that one office that I spoke about. That's all about breaking down silos. Because that helps your organization run more efficiently. It drives employee satisfaction and better employee experience. It drives ultimately happier customers as well as happier partners. Those are very sort of big ticket objectives. But being very clear about what you're working towards is absolutely essential. So again, it's not technology and innovation for the point of innovation. It's innovation enabled by emerging technology and people and process and data change to actually achieve what those objectives are. But we definitely, there's vast room for improvement. I think everyone's challenge right now is that there's so much that everyone wants to do. And so it's all about the priorities, which is why I shared that data cycle as part of my session, which is because so many of the challenges do start with data. So it's just to be thoughtful about identifying a place where you want to start, as well as about where you want to get to.
Thank you so much. Well, a lot of food for thought, dear viewers. Thank you so much for joining us today, Elena. I hope you enjoy the rest of DPW today.
Thank you so much, Vivienne. Everybody have a great rest of the event.
Thank you. Thank you.